Good, good. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. So the sun is shining, and with that comes even more cabin fever. Cabin fever that is very understandable right about now. Go ahead, Mary. Nice mask.
Thank you. Homemade.
There you go. With that comes the anticipation of reopenings, and we had earlier this week the governor announced the statewide reopenings for Massachusetts, and I'm here today to make some announcements about what we'll be doing specifically here in the city of New Bedford. By and large, as you've heard me say, the governor's approach to reopening has been a sound one. It's been grounded in the data, it's been clearly communicated, and it's been incremental. He announced a plan that would involve 4 phases of reopening, the first of which started this past Monday and continues to go through next Monday, and then we'll see what happens after that in the way of how the transmission of the disease will inform future reopenings. And I think that overall that approach is consistent with CDC guidance and the guidance of other authorities like Johns Hopkins and the Harvard School of Public Health and many others who recognize that, after this first phase, in the first phase that we've been in, the crisis response phase, our effort has been largely geared around buying time to allow the hospital system to gear up so that it can withstand a surge. And this next phase, or set of phases, the exercise also is about buying time, not so much to allow the healthcare system to catch up, because it more or less has, but to prevent a major outbreak while we await the development of perhaps a vaccine or at least better therapeutics or herd immunity, any one of those things. We don't want a major outbreak, and that's really the nub of the exercise right now. And along the way, look, I mean, the effort here is to keep people healthy and safe. This is a public health crisis, the likes of which we've not experienced in our lifetimes. None of us, unless you're over 100 years old. This is the first time since 1918 that the United States or the world has faced a major pandemic, and we're working our way through it. So I have maintained all along that we will do here in New Bedford that which is in the interests of New Bedford. I believe that it's important to do everything we can to remain consistent with the state guidance, and that's because we don't want businesses outside the city gaining an unfair business advantage. We don't want to sow confusion among residents. So by and large, our announcement today will be that we are following the state guidance. But there are a couple of areas where we do believe we need to depart. The statewide numbers right now, as has been widely reported, are generally declining. New cases and new hospitalizations across Massachusetts have been on the decline for 2 or 3 weeks now. We have not been seeing exactly that in New Bedford. While new cases and new hospitalizations haven't continued to go up here, they're also not going down. We have been plateaued for some time, and I think we've passed out some of the latest available data concerning new cases and hospitalizations, and so you have that available. Those are available on the city's website as well. And so, the conventional wisdom as it's developed is that you need to see a consistent decline over a couple of weeks before you can really start to reopen things in earnest. And that's the guidance that, again, it comes from the CDC, it comes from Hopkins. It's what the states of Massachusetts and Rhode Island have been following, and I think it's what we will generally follow here. So as we look at what's being reopened, it's largely things that are of relatively low risk, low intensity of contacts, infrequent contacts, and those are things that can be managed, where we part ways with the state are in two places, and they both have to do with activities that have the potential for large indoor gatherings. So the first has to do with industrial facilities. About 2 weeks ago, we issued an order. I issued an order in conjunction with the Board of Health that set forth a set of fairly stringent regulations concerning personal hygiene, social distancing, employee reporting, employee screening at large industrial facilities. So these will include factories, warehouses, seafood processing plants, recycling facilities, places where there are a lot of people working in a traditional industrial setting. These are big employers, and we think that there is greater risk there because, look, there are more people in those places. For one thing, those people have been working in many cases all along because most of those businesses were deemed essential from the start, so they didn't stop. In the case, for instance, of seafood processors, look, New Bedford supplies America with seafood. It supplies pretty much all the Western world with seafood. And so, those businesses were deemed essential and have continued to work. Same thing with a number of our factories. So, so we put these measures in place to lower the risk of transmission among folks who've had to continue to work. Those regulations are more demanding than what the state put in place, and in my view, given where the disease is here and given how we've worked through a lot of the details concerning industrial settings, we're going to leave those in place. They'll continue to be enforced by the health department under Damone Chaplin's leadership. We've had really good responses from businesses, a lot of compliance, but we know the virus is still out there and the threat's still there, and so we're going to continue to do just that. We think that in the state's guidelines there's a requirement for a plan that doesn't have to be submitted to the state but has to be held on hand, that businesses should still do that. All businesses, including industrial businesses. But for industrial facilities, businesses need to know, those kinds of businesses need to know that New Bedford's order will remain in place and will continue to be enforced. Secondly, the state issued guidance concerning worship services, and it's been hard on everybody, everyone who is observant, not to be able to go to mass, to go to whatever services they go to during this period. It's one of the prohibition on services has been very disruptive to the lives of many, not just here but everywhere where those prohibitions have been in place. So we believe that they should go forward, and the state has laid out a set of, I think, very thoughtful guidelines about how those should be held. So there's guidance in the state guidelines concerning communion and social distancing and choirs and a number of other things that I think are very, very useful. The state also included a facility cap that is equal to 40% of the permitted capacity of any given worship facility. That's where we part ways with the state. We have many houses of worship that see services that are where attendance is north of 500 people and sometimes close to 1,000 people, even beside Christmas Eve and Easter. On every weekend we see that at certain of our houses of worship. And while we do want people to come together in a time of great anxiety, those crowds, even at 40% of those crowds, those would be too big in our view. So what we're going to do is for houses of worship, we're going to include an alternate cap on attendance. So it will be 40% of permitted capacity or 100 people, whichever is lower. So that's the rule we'll apply in New Bedford, and we have been discussing this already We've discussed this already with the Diocese of Fall River and a number of pastors at independent churches based here in the city, and we think that that's a sensible way of going about it, so long as all the other social distancing and common sense measures that the state has recommended are observed. It's really, really important. I can't emphasize it enough. If you look at this morning's Wall Street Journal, you'll see a piece on the front page concerning the risks associated with large indoor crowds, and that, you know, the data is starting to settle on the idea that if there's anything to be avoided as we go forward in these next phases, it's that big indoor crowds. Those will be the last things that will open up anywhere, not just here in New Bedford, but anywhere where that has experienced the disease in earnest. And that's what we're trying to get at with respect to both of these departures from the state guidance in industrial facilities, in churches and other houses of worship. So we'll continue to remind folks as we go on about that. And we think that that's the most sensible way to do it. We have a few other things I just wanted to just go through really quickly today. I'm sure there are lots of questions. Maybe I'll anticipate a few questions, but with respect to other things, let me just tick through the list of items that the state addressed in its in the governor's that the governor addressed in his initial Phase 1 plan. Parks, trails, and our Blue Lane, those have all been open. We emphasize social distancing there. We'll continue to do that for the foreseeable future, and mask wearing as well, of course. That's so no change there. Our beaches. Beaches under the state's plan will reopen officially on May 25th, so that we will follow that here in New Bedford. There is some detail around parking plans, parking arrangements at beaches. We don't want big crowds at beaches. We think the risk of transmission, it appears, is fairly low at beaches, but we also want people to maintain space between one another. And so what that means practically for the city is that we will only allow New Bedford residents to get a parking pass for the beach, just New Bedford residents, and the parking pass requirement, resident parking pass requirement, will be strictly enforced. So that we can anticipate that if you go to the beach, you got to get a parking pass, and you can't get one unless you live in New Bedford. Hopefully that'll change as time goes on this summer. The Buttonwood Park Zoo, pursuant to the state order, will reopen. It will reopen a little bit later, not on the 25th, but on May 30th. There are a host of occupancy restrictions that the zoo will follow after it opens up, and so people can go right to the website for that. Hair salons and barber shops, I include myself at the top of the list of someone who needs a haircut right about now. Those will reopen again pursuant to and consistent with state guidelines on May 25th. And again, the state laid out a set of restrictions there as well. You need to do it by appointment. There have to be certain hygiene measures in place. Same thing with pet groomers. May 25th, we'll be following the state. Car washes will be following the state. Recreational boaters, boating, we played a big part in our Port Authority did in writing the state's guidelines on this, and so we're almost identical in the approaches there. So we'll be applying the state guidelines there. That will open officially May 25th. Retail stores and private offices, those will both reopen on the 25th, consistent with state guidelines. I will note that we will still not we'll still refrain from enforcing meter violations downtown. Everybody who's parking here is doing it gratis on the city at this point. We anticipate that when stores open more fully, as well as restaurants opening more fully, that meter parking enforcement will kick back into gear. That under the state's plan, that's in Phase 2. And then auto dealers, will follow the state guidelines. City offices and facilities, we're no change there. We're still going to be working remotely for the time being. I think it's working relatively well. We're not missing out on a lot, I don't think, right now. I think because we've been coordinating the efforts of city agencies, so no change there. And finally, libraries will be open for curbside pickup, kind of in the same way that retail is going to operate. So that's our approach. And I'm sure everybody has some particular question. I'd be happy to field them. I do want to just recognize our health director, Damone Chaplin, who's done a great job and has has got a lot of balls in the air, but has really been able to keep them up over the course of the last several weeks, with more to come. And I want to recognize the city councilors who are here and support Scott Lima, Brad Markey, Derek Baptiste, and I think that's it for city council. So I'll open it up for questions, guys. But just one final comment. You know, we're really trying to base our decisions on the data as we move along. We're all, you know, moving forward incrementally. I think that's the way to go. And you know, things are getting better. The curve here in New Bedford is flattening out. We're just not as far down the hill as the state is. We are, I will hasten to note, I neglected to add, New Bedford compared to other cities in the Northeast has sharply fewer cases per capita, and so I think that's attributable to the fact that you know, we got out ahead of this thing pretty quickly, but it also means that, you know, the work is hardly done, as you can tell. So with that, I'll open it up. Yeah, we talked specifically to the diocese, and we've talked to a few pastors of some of the Hispanic churches. You know, in general, you know, there are many masses that take place that have fewer than 100 people. We know that there are some around the city that consistently see hundreds of people, and I think the solution there to keep those masses under the cap is just to hold more masses, just to schedule more, to spread it out over the course of the weekend, which is going to take some work, but I think that's necessary and appropriate under the circumstances.
And will your office be enforcing it?
Yeah, so we will be out there with some friendly reminders. I have a meeting with a number of pastors of the Hispanic churches on Saturday to talk through this in some more detail. Again, we've been in communication with the diocese as well as, you know, the representatives of certain religious groups around other denominations around the city. So we want to make it work for them. And honestly, I think all of them get it. I mean, they understand that we've got to take these precautions, and I think what we're trying to do is strike a balance between, you know, the public health recommendations around large gatherings in particular on the one hand, and, you know, the need for people to, you know, to connect, even if it's, you know, at distances of 6 feet. And Mary.
I just want to get clear. So it's 100 people or 40% of permanent capacity, whichever is less.
Yes.
And so permanent capacity meaning what's on file with the building department?
Right. So that's what the state directed. 40% of building capacity. It's just that we have churches and other religious groups who are in buildings that have fairly large capacities and fill them up consistently on Sundays. So, you know, we're trying to thin that out.
Like, I mean, is there still a 6 foot?
Yeah, all that everywhere, 6 feet away from one another. You know, I strongly, as the state does, strongly recommend against passing out communion. And honestly, singing should be kept at a minimum. I remind people of that awful incident in Washington State where that choir got together back in February and had a practice, and then, you know, a few days later there were, I believe, 6 people who died in that choir. So we have to be careful about that.
Part of the state, is that the singing kept to a minimum? Is that mentioned in the state guidelines or local guidelines at all?
That's my recommendation.
Just a recommendation.
I don't remember that being in there. I have the state guidelines here. I can give them to you later. But I think it's just the evidence is that singing should be, humming is a good substitute.
Mayor, obviously getting the economy chugging along is going to be good for the city, but you know, we're hearing that feast is not going to be taking place this year. So can you just talk a little bit about what the loss of that means for the city?
Well, it's both. You know, the feast is a signature event, right? We understand it to be one of the largest ethnic festivals in the United States, easily the largest in New England, and so it's a real source of pride for the city. And but at the same time, and it helps the economy. There are a lot of people who travel here and stay in our hotels, and, you know, go out and do other stuff and buy stuff, and so there's a multiplier effect that event has in the regional economy. But all that said, I mean, of all the decisions that we made about canceling this or that was one of the easiest. It's, you know, as you know, it's a big event. and people are packed closely together, very closely together, especially during the concerts at night. And that's exactly the kind of large event, even though it's not indoors, that we have to avoid. I commend to everybody the Wall Street Journal article from this morning's paper, because it really, there are a number of countries around the world, Germany in particular, that held major events, the UK as well, even into March, and they deeply regret doing that. So we don't want to see that happen. We don't want to see an outbreak. There's a history associated with the Spanish flu pandemic that shows that places that held off on the big events did much better.
Have industry been following your order well, or has anyone had to be fined as a result of not following your emergency order?
Which one? The one concerning industrial facilities? I think, do you want to speak to that? I think the compliance has been pretty good, but I'll let Damone characterize it.
Yeah, overall, the compliance has been well. We've gotten a lot of calls and questions about how they can comply, and in a lot of cases how they can enhance their compliance with the order. So in general, it's been pretty well received. We will begin to do some of the enhanced inspections in the next coming weeks. They schedule them now, and so we anticipate this to be pretty smooth and cooperative going forward.
So all of these things I went through are in the press release, but our goal here again is to to take sensible steps that are based on the data, that are based on public health expertise, and so we'll see. So in phase 2 of the governor's plan, assuming that cases statewide continue to go down and they proceed with that next phase, we'll do the same thing here. If it looks like things are heading down here, then we will largely follow suit with the state. I do suspect that the industrial facilities order will remain in place for the foreseeable future, even as we advance into those new phases. But again, I don't want to prejudge it. But I think businesses, we like to try to give businesses some certainty and some clear guidance. And I think the clear guidance is that they need to settle into those practices that are laid out in that order. Anything else?
Yeah, one more question. Is your administration developing guidelines in anticipation of the state lifting restrictions on dining?
We are. We're trying to. We anticipate that when that time comes, that there will likely be some options. First off, for outdoor dining, and so we're taking a look at spaces that could work. So we are having people, to do just that right now. So. A lot more to come. That's probably a couple of weeks out, at least, again, assuming trends continue to go the right way, both here in the city as well as statewide. Okay. All right. Anyway, good to see you all again. I mean, I do mean this. We appreciate what the media is doing these days, and it's not easy to be working as you are remotely, and then getting together in crowds like this. So we appreciate your getting the information out to everybody so they can keep themselves and their families safe. Thanks, everyone.
Did you know that you can watch any of New Bedford Cable Network shows anytime, anywhere on all of your mobile devices? How, you may ask? Just log on to nbcablenetwork.com and bam! You have all 3 channels at your fingertips: public, educational, and government access. Here, you can view our program schedules, watch our channel's live broadcasts, or search for a particular program in our vast library of shows. Last year alone, New Bedford Cable Network produced over 500 shows, and nearly all of them are available online at nbcablenetwork.com. Not only can you stay up to date with what's happening in your local government and schools, but also dive into some of New Bedford Cable Network's original award-winning programs. So check us out at nbcablenetwork.com.